Well, Food Banks Canada says this year's report on demand across the country is devastating.
CP24's Courtney joins us live in North York this morning with more on this report that's set to be released. And Courtney, we know that the demand for food has really risen post-pandemic.
It certainly has, Nick and Jennifer. In fact, this report from Food Banks Canada came out just minutes ago. I've had a chance to go over some of the numbers. They're quite alarming. Food Banks Canada suggesting that food bank use in this country is at an all-time Canadian high. So we want to go over some of those numbers. While I have a minute, I can tell you that since 2019, so about 4 years ago, food bank use has gone up 78.5%. Also, as part of this Hunger Count 2023, about a 32% increase just since last year, and a third of those who are relying on food banks right now just to get by are children. Let's bring in Neil Hetherington. He's the CEO of the Daily Bread Food Bank. He's also had a chance to look over some of the numbers coming from Food Banks Canada. Neil, these numbers very alarming, but I'm wondering, are they surprising to you?
No, they're not surprising. In fact, actually, in the Toronto area, our numbers are even more grave. We have seen across the country, as you mentioned, 30% rise. Ontario saw the largest rise in food bank usage with 40%. And then here in Toronto, we saw about 50% rise in food bank usage. What has been a surprise to us is the growing number of individuals whose primary source of income is derived from employment. Those numbers are rising dramatically. And at a time where unemployment's so low, it just ought not to be that food bank usage is as high as it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, I noticed in this report talking about there are about 70% of those who are relying on the food bank, but they hold a job. It's just not enough to be able to afford to keep the fridge full.
Yeah, so that speaks to some systemic issues. So we need to make sure that there is decent, affordable housing built. If you have a job but you don't have a place to live, there's a real problem there. Next is we need to make sure that there is a reduction in precarious employment. So you might have the equivalent of full-time hours, but unless you have benefits, then you're making difficult choices between a food bank or medications for your children. And so, so precarious employment, seeing that reduced, seeing a growth. I was delighted to see Mayor Chow bring out an affordable housing strategy yesterday, and my prayer is that it gets enacted and constructed right away.
Mm-hmm. And on that, we are seeing in this report from Food Banks Canada saying that all levels of government need to do more to address affordability. You mentioned at the municipal level, we're hearing from Toronto, Mayor Chow making this a priority. How much of a difference would that make if all levels of government come to the table and make this a main priority in ensuring that people have enough money?
Listen, at the time of the report, it went to March of this past year, and it said there were 2 million Canadians who went in March to food banks across the country. In Toronto, that number was 270,000, about 15% of the country. Now, 270,000 client visits in a single month in a city is a crisis. And if we had 270,000 Torontonians without hydro, without access to water, we would bring in the army. We would create a national strategy to immediately address this and address it from the systemic causes, which again, affordable housing, income supports, and precarious employment. That's what we want to tackle.
Mm-hmm. Neil Hetherington is the CEO of the Daily Bread Food Bank, joining us live, sharing his thoughts on this report that's just been released. Neil, thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
And Jennifer, I can tell you in the next 30 minutes or so, we will have a chance to speak with the CEO of Food Banks Canada about this report to further break down the numbers. But certainly just taking a look at what we have so far, it is very, very concerning. Over to you.
Yeah, very alarming indeed. Courtney, thank you for that conversation.